America, the land of the free and the home of the please don't let those other guys win. There's nothing quite as American as baseball, apple pie, and saying get out there and vote to mobilize your base knowing that you're doing it to hurt the other party, but pretending like you're doing it because you care about people actually voting. That's the America I know. Once again, that time is upon us, and that time, of course, are the midterm elections. In this video, we're going to go through some of the most likely outcomes of those elections, as well as talking about a couple of the key races that are particularly close, and then we're going to take a look at what all of this might mean moving forward. But before we jump in and talk about the federal elections, I wanted to quickly talk about the state and local ones. These are very important elections too that can have a significant impact on where you live. We're just not going to talk about them today because they're not very important. Okay, that's not entirely true. It can have an impact on your own local government or state government, but it's not going to have an impact nationally at the federal level. If you elect someone to the House or Senate, well, now they vote for laws for the entire country, and so that does have a greater impact on everybody. I do want to briefly talk about the races for governor. According to this article from 538, approximately 26 states will end this election with a Republican governor, and 24 will end with a Democrat. For what's worth, I'm going to be referencing 538 a lot in today's video because they simply do the best job of trying to filter through all of the polls and give unbiased analysis of what's happening, so that will be our primary source for the data. If the election shakes out the way it's forecasted to, then 196 million people will live under Democratic governors and 133 million will live under Republican ones. I don't find these numbers to be too surprising. Typically, urban centers tend to lean more Democrat and rural areas tend to be more Republican, and I think this falls in line with that. Here we have a map of the US showing the party of your governor and what they lean towards for this election. So the dark blue means that it is currently a Democrat and he will be continuing to be the governor because he's not up for re-election. And the same is the opposite for the Republicans. If it's a dark red, that means that there's a Republican governor and they're not up for re-election as well. There certainly are some interesting results when we take a look at this. We see some surprising Democrat spots like Louisiana and North Carolina. And then we also see some Republican ones in the Northeast that you might not anticipate. Although as you get closer to Maine, there is a bit more of a Republican base than you would see in a lot of the other northeastern states. There are several reasons we might see a wider array of things happen in gubernatorial races that we might not see in presidential ones, but I think that probably the largest impact is that voter turnout tends to be significantly lower in these midterm elections, and so if you can mobilize your base, you have a much higher chance of winning than you might in a presidential election. As less of the population votes, the party that has more people that really care tend to win because you only have to mobilize less people in order to win the election. In an extreme example, let's say only 3 people voted. Well, if you and your buddy went down to the polling station, you guys probably take that one home. If we look at the races that are particularly close in this election, we can see there are several states that have very slight leads for Republicans that could realistically go either way. The closest race is happening in Ohio between Mark DeWine and Richard Cordray. Mike DeWine is a 71-year-old Republican who has previously served 2 terms in the U.S. Senate representing Ohio. Richard Cordray is a 59-year-old Democrat who's held many positions in the state of Ohio, ultimately becoming the Ohio Attorney General in 2009 through 2011, and then moving over to work for both Barack Obama as well as Donald Trump as the first director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Interesting note about this election, this is not the first time these guys have faced off. In 2010, they both ran for Attorney General and DeWine took the position from Cordray. I did a little research to find some clips of these guys debating. I'm glad I did.
The fact that we would listen to you now on drug policy would be like asking for navigation advice from the captain of the Titanic.
You know, Richard, you're all talk and you do nothing. You've been a failure at every job you have ever had.
I think these guys are going to be friends. It feels a little cringy and bad to see these candidates hurl insults at each other. I mean, take a look at this gem.
We've had an opioid czar in Ohio for the past 8 years, and his name is Mike DeWine. When you see him, tell him he's done a lousy job.
Oh, ouch. Whew. Sick burn. You're going to need to be drinking some of DeWine after that one. Also, could that insult have been more obviously scripted and rehearsed? When you see him, tell him he's done a lousy job. Just say it like a sentence, goddammit. DeWine did hit back with some strong stances of his own, including his position on recreational marijuana.
You're not going to take a position at all on recreational marijuana? I will. I'm against it.
Hold on, wait. I'm receiving some news. Old Republican doesn't like marijuana. We'll continue to cover the story if I can remember what the fuck we were talking about. We've also got tight gubernatorial races in Georgia, Kansas, Nevada, Wisconsin, Alaska, Florida. We're actually getting a little bit less close as we get to the bottom of that list. So really the first 5 states are all within 2 percentage points of one way or another. So if you particularly care about this race, you might want to get out there and vote.
For our communities.
For our communities.
For our communities.
Moving on, let's talk about Congress. Now, we have an interesting equilibrium being reached here where Republicans are roughly 85% to win the Senate and Democrats are roughly 85% to win the House. I got these numbers from 538 and I'll put some links in the description below. If the Democrats do take control of the House, it'll be a big win for the Democrats. In fact, one might have to wonder, what do the Republicans even have left besides the presidency, the Senate, the Supreme Court, likely future judge nominations, state governments, governors, probably a lot of county level positions, basically all of it. Let's start off by taking a closer look at the House of Representatives. What's interesting about the House is that every seat is in play every 2 years. That's right, 435 people will run for either re-election, or if there's no incumbent, then there'll be 2 new people facing off. But the point is, all 435 seats have to be won every 2 years. The result of this is it's a giant clusterfuck. This forecast estimates a 6 and 7 chance the Democrats will win control of the House, including a bell curve of how likely different scenarios are. If we look at the House of Representatives over the last 64 years, we can see the Democrats have had control much more than the Republicans. They've had 44 of those years, whereas the Republicans have only had 20. However, it's been kind of streaky here because we saw the Democrats have control of the House from the mid-50s all the way to the mid-90s, 40 straight years of controlling the House. And in the last 24 years, the Democrats have only had control for 4 of those years. So the Republicans have certainly been faring much better in recent history. It's also worth noting that a lot of the Republican wins in the House tend to be very small marginal wins, and that the Democrat wins tend to be a bit more substantial. The forecast estimates that the most likely scenario is the Democrats end up with roughly 233 seats of the 435. Now, this is not really a blue wave. I know a lot of Democrats are hoping that the Democrats are going to come in and smash everything because there's a lot of anger about what happened in the 2016 presidential election. But 53% would actually be one of the lowest margins of victory the Democrats have had in really quite some time. However, a win's a win. And in the House, unlike the Senate, really just a simple majority is what's really needed in order to get a lot of things through. In the Senate, having 60 members in the Senate can help you a lot, like in spots like filibusters. But generally speaking, a majority is what's important. And it looks very likely like the Democrats are going to win it. Now, you might be thinking back to some numbers we showed towards the start of this video where we talked about the number of people that will have Democratic governors versus Republican governors. And why is that so different in terms of percentage of total population compared to the House? And the reason is gerrymandering. Now, for some of you guys that don't know what gerrymandering is, basically you can decide what the shapes of the districts are in your state if you control the state government. And sometimes states get pretty ridiculous. Essentially, they try and batch a lot of people into single districts that are all of the same opposing party type so that they kind of waste their votes by winning this district when it's not needed. And then they try to very slightly win lots of other districts. This process has typically favored Republicans. Now, before you think that it's the evil Republicans doing all of this bad stuff and the Democrats are all innocent, well, Democrats have just as aggressively tried the gerrymander as well. It's just they haven't been winning a lot of those elections, and so they've been unable to do so. The party in power almost always tries to change things to help them win and stay in power, and the losing party almost always has to fight up an uphill battle against those changes. On that topic, North Carolina has been a very interesting state to take a look at because it was ruled by a panel of judges in 2016 that they had been gerrymandered so badly with the districts there for Republicans to win that it was deemed to be unconstitutional. However, even though it was ruled unconstitutional, these gerrymandered districts will be used for this term's election because there wasn't enough time to draw up a new one. They only had 2 years. I'm sure everyone was rushing to get that through. We can see how bad of an effect this has on North Carolina. If we highlight this map that shows every district and the forecast for it, we can see that in a 13 district state, only 3 of the districts are solidly Democrat, with 1 being a toss-up, and the remaining 9 are all Republican or leaning Republican. We can see in the 2016 presidential election that Donald Trump won 50.5% of the vote and Hillary Clinton won 46.7%. Now, this isn't going to be an exact science because I think in this last presidential election, a lot more people are voting for more who they didn't like than who they liked. But you can see there's at least a reasonably large Democratic base in North Carolina that is going to be limited to 3, 4, and maybe if they get very lucky 5 districts, and a state that has 13. So you can really see this effect takes hold of the House in a lot of different ways. Well, really actually just one way. The The Democrats are very likely to take control of the House, but that is not the case in the Senate. And it really boils down to logistics more than anything else as to why they can't win. Simply put, there aren't many spots for the Democrats to win this time around. Now, there are 6-year terms in the Senate, so this means that every 6 years you have to run again. And that means every 2 years, roughly 1/3 of the senators have to run for re-election. Well, this is a really bad term for the Democrats to be able to gain any ground because there are simply not many seats that are not currently held by Democrats. 42 Republican seats are not up for re-election, and if the Senate ends up tied, well, Mike Pence will cast the deciding vote. The vice president essentially acts as a tiebreaker when there is a split Senate. This means if the Republicans want to maintain control of the Senate, they only have to win 8 of the races in order to do so, which is not exactly a tough task considering how many seats there are to win. Looking at 538 Senate forecasts, we can see the likelihood of different senators winning in various states, and we also can see a peanut map that shows from every state what the breakdown of Republican and Democratic senators are from that state, as well as the likelihood to win in states where there are elections. Compared to the gubernatorial map, this looks a little bit more like what you might see in a presidential election because these elections are held half of the time on a year with a presidential election. And so it's a little harder, I think, for people to win when you're the minority party. The exceptions, obviously we can see a Democratic senator from Alabama, which seems sort of interesting, as well as a Republican in Colorado seems a bit interesting as well, and a Democrat in Montana. But overall, you tend to have both seats be one party, and that's the majority party within that state. If we start to take a look closer at some of these races, well, we can see that there are 4 races the Republicans are simply not going to lose. In Utah, Mitt Romney is at 99.9% to win. Not exactly too surprising there. In Wyoming, John Barrasso is 99.9% to win. Same thing for Deb Fischer in Nebraska, also very likely to win, 97.8%. And then in Mississippi, Roger Wicker is 99.5% to win. So these are just simply not places the Democrats are going to win. Yeah, it's not impossible, but realistically, it's just not going to happen. There are about 6 races that this election is going to come down to, races that could realistically go either way. Both parties have a shot to win. Those races are Arizona's race between Kirsten Sinema and Martha McSally, the Nevada race between Dean Heller and Jackie Rosen, the North Dakota race between Kevin Cramer and Heidi Heitkamp, the Missouri race between Claire McCaskill and Josh Hawley, and the Florida race between Bill Nelson and Rick Scott, as well as the Indiana race between Joe Donnelly and Mike Braun. Barring any type of major upset in some of the other states, if the Republicans win even one of those races, they will have at least 50 members and control the Senate. So essentially, there's no room for error. If the Democrats lose even one of these close races, the Republicans will have control, and that's just simply not very likely. It's one thing to win a couple of tight races, but to win 6, including ones where the Republicans are a very slight favorite, that's very, very, very unlikely. The closest Senate race, and we're going to take a quick look at that a bit closer, is the one in Nevada, which is particularly interesting to me because I live in Nevada. In this state, Dean Heller is 56% to win the election, and Jackie Rosen is 44%. Okay, so it looks like we're probably headed for a split between both parties. What does that mean moving forward? What can we expect to happen? The answer, and it might not surprise you, is that things slow down in terms of how many laws end up being enacted because the parties have to reach compromise and work together. But one thing I did find that was kind of interesting is that it might not slow down quite as much as you think. According to this article from Politics Theory Practice, we can see a graph of the normal distribution of the percentage of total legislation enacted from the 93rd to 113th Congress. So we can see what percent of legislation is actually enacted when we isolate for whether the House and the Senate are unified or divided. And what we can see is that the frequency of laws enacted is not actually as different as you might think. We can also see this in terms of number of enacted laws, whereas it tends to average around 582 when it's unified. We still see it around 476 laws when we don't. Now, the big difference might be that those laws that we're not seeing enacted are some of the more controversial ones that people feel more passionate and strongly about. So maybe this isn't a good representation of what the impact might be on laws you care about. It's just really total laws. I think both parties have things that they can be happy about when it comes to this election. The Democrats finally get their foot in the door and can sit at the big boy table with everybody else, and the Republicans manage to maintain a fairly firm control of the rest of the government. So this is not really going to be a make or break election unless things really swing one way here towards the end, but I'm certainly interested in what happens, and I'm looking forward to it. That's going to be it for me, guys. Hope you enjoyed this analysis of the 2018 election. I'll put some links in the description below, and if you enjoyed this video, hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel. All right, guys, see you again soon.